And the Lord called Samuel again a third time. So he arose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you did call me." Then Eli perceived that the Lord had called the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go lie down, and it shall be if he calls you that you must say," everybody say these words, please. "Speak, Lord, for your servant hears." So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood and called as at other times, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel answered, "Speak, for your servant hears." Then the Lord said to Samuel, "Behold, I will do something in Israel at which both ears of everyone who hears it will tingle." I want to preach to you for a few moments about how to discern the whispers of God. The whispers of God, how to discern them, how to hear the voice of God, because John 10 is very clear that God still speaks. Maybe not audibly, but he does to our spirit. He does absolutely have a voice. John 10, Jesus said, "My sheep will know my voice." One of the evidences, one of the proofs of the fact that you're a sheep and not a goat, and that's a biblical illustration that is used between God's flock and Satan's flock. And he calls Satan's flock goats, and he calls his flock sheep. And he said, "My sheep know my voice. They learn to hear my voice." And I want you to understand, God still speaks. He desires to communicate. He speaks to, as the text that I just read, he speaks to young people. He speaks to teenagers. He speaks to children. He speaks to business people. He speaks to dads, husbands, men. The problem is we don't have the ears, or our ears are so cluttered with the things of life and other voices that it drowns out his voice. And the big thing that I've learned about God, I preach more now out of experience than I do out of just, my study stuff has changed. I don't know how to explain it, but I'm in a season in my life, in the season that I'm in, that I'm teaching you as much, not just what I've learned from books, but what I've learned from life and walking with Jesus for many, many years. And God seldom yells. That's why you have to stay sensitive to him, because when he speaks, it's a whisper. It's usually, and most people are so busy and in such a big thing that they don't have that sensitivity that anywhere God wants to speak. He doesn't yell, he doesn't scream, he whispers. And in this text, in 1 Samuel 3, Samuel kept getting awakened by the voice of God calling his name 2 times, "Samuel, Samuel," and he woke up. And he thought it was so real to him, he thought that it was the high priest who was down the hall. He was asleep, and it was night, and it was dark. And he goes down and he knocks on the high priest's door, Eli, and he wakes him up, and Eli says, "I didn't call you, go back to sleep." He goes back, it happens again. He says, "I did not call you, go back." A few hours later, he hears the voice again a third time. And when he goes the third time and wakes the old priest up, the priest said, "I perceive that God is trying to speak to you. The next time you hear that voice, say, 'Speak, Lord, your servant hears.'" And God spoke to him. And those words were so powerful, they would shake the life of Samuel. Samuel would go on to become the premier prophet of the Old Testament. The Bible said so powerful were those whispers that God would give him, that when he would speak, not one word fell to the ground. That when he would prophesy, not one thing he would speak would not come to pass. So powerful were the words that he spoke that when Israel had to have a king, God told Samuel to go to Jesse's house, and it would be one of his sons, and he brought in 7 sons. He had 8, but he only brought in 7. And he started to pour the oil on the firstborn, which would be pretty normal, because God had already told him that one of the sons from that household. But the voice of the Lord was so clear to Samuel that God said, that's not the one. And he held the oil back. And he went to the second one. God said, this is what, that is not the one. That is not the one. He said it 7 times. And he turned and he said, is there not any other sons? And he said, well, I've got one out in the field. He said, send for him. And the moment he walked in, think of the importance of this whisper. The moment that little shepherd boy David walked in, the voice of the Lord came in Samuel's ears and said, that's the one. Anoint him. He will become the king of Israel. Anoint him. And out of his seed will come forth Messiah. What a powerful moment. What if he had missed those whispers? What if he had not learned to develop his ear to hear the voice of God? How important are those whispers? Not one word fell to the ground. I was thinking about my own life when I stood at a crossroad, at a transition, at a time in my life where I was unsure, and it was uncertain, it was exciting, and it was uncertain. And I felt anxiety, and I felt also like it was an important time in my life. And I remember I was in school, in college, and I was really seeking God the summer that I came home from school. I was seeking God, and the school was off, and I was saying, Lord, what's the big picture for my life? I was trying to figure out, am I going to be a teacher? I don't want to teach music. Am I going to be a performer? And I decided I was going to try to be a performer. And was practicing and all of that on the horn 5-6 hours a day. Somewhere during that summer, I just felt so desperate that something said to me, just fast for 3 days and put it on the altar. And if I were to be honest, I had a little nudging, like I knew I was supposed to preach, but I wouldn't even go there. And I went those 3 days, and it was around midnight, and I went to the tabernacle down the road that my dad, who was like a bishop or whatever you would call it, over a bunch of churches, and that they would gather once a year. And it was a room that held about 1,600 people, and it was dark. No lights were on. I had a key. I went in, and I just prayed. It was almost midnight. I was so looking forward to midnight because I was going to be eating at 12:01. And I had poured my heart out to God in those 3 days, and I said, well, I don't know what you want me to do, but you're going to have to tell me clearly. I am willing to do whatever you want me to do, but you're going to have to tell me. And I'm telling you, around midnight, I heard the whisper of God deep in my spirit. And he said, I have called you to preach. Go preach and do what I've called you to do. And it was one of those moments. It was just a whisper. I didn't see it written in Technicolor. I didn't see graffiti on the side of the tabernacle. I didn't have an angel tap me. I didn't see the room light up with a glow. All I had was I was in his presence. I knew I was in his presence. And I had this gentle whisper that said, you're called. I chose you. You didn't choose me. Go. I began to preach, and God began to help us as me and my brother traveled all over the nation. Then on another occasion, a few years later, talking about the whispers of God, he never yelled at me, just whispers. And I was in a situation where I was a single now by myself. And I was living in Tennessee. And I preached, and I met a girl named Sharice Swilly. And we began to date, and God didn't have to yell on that one because I was able to hear the whisper, but I used my eyes too, and I liked what I saw. And I fell in love with her, and at some point, I knew and I heard the whisper, marry her. She's the one. She's the one. And I don't know what I would have done without Sharice. It's a little funny with her sitting down here on the front, but it's just the truth. I don't know what I would have done without that whisper. And we've been through a lot, but we go through it together. And it's a powerful, powerful thing when God whispers, that's the one. And the Lord told me to tell every single person under the sound of my voice, wherever you're listening to this, for every single person who desires it, there is a whisper coming in your future. That is the one, because He has a plan for your life. God has a whisper for you.